Nouvelle séance, nouvelle conférence. Cette fois, ce n'est pas une table ronde, c'était bien une conférence et nous avons la chance, l'honneur et l'immense privilège d'accueillir une championne du monde, non seulement du logiciel libre, mais aussi du gouvernement ouvert, puisque effectivement, Pia Andrews, qui nous vient d'Australie, je vous invite à mettre des casques pour ceux qui veulent la traduction, comme moi, en cours de séance. Pia nous fera une présentation en anglais dans le texte. Elle est connue en Australie depuis très très longtemps pour son action en faveur du logiciel libre. Elle a su réunir les citoyens, les gouvernements, les agents des gouvernements autour de la notion d'open government en Australie. Elle a mis en place l'open data pour l'Australie. Elle a mis en place en Nouvelle-Zélande la transformation digitale du pays. Et enfin, aujourd'hui, elle est directrice opérationnelle de l'administration numérique du gouvernement de Nouvelle-Zélande, de Nouvelle-Galles du Sud, pardon. Pour la petite histoire, la Nouvelle-Galles du Sud, c'est 1,5 fois la France, c'est à peu près le territoire de la Suisse. Et nous sommes heureux d'accueillir Pia aujourd'hui. Un dernier mot, Pia, si tu me le permets. En 2014, Pia a été nommée parmi les 100 femmes importantes du pays Australie. Et en 2018, Pia a été nommée parmi les 100 personnalités du numérique remarquables dans le monde. Merci Pia de nous faire l'honneur d'être ici, d'avoir fait tous ces kilomètres. Et à toi la parole.
Thank you for such a lovely introduction. It's always hard to follow my bio, so I appreciate that. Given that the last panel was explicitly about data, and I've spent 10 years working in public sector data, I thought I'd spend just 5 minutes on a couple of points that may be helpful. The first one is that what we found in Australia when we took over doing open and public data was that when you try to tell agencies or tell people, tell departments to publish data because it's the mandate or because someone said so, even if it's the Prime Minister in Australia, which was the case, they generally say we're too busy, we don't have the money, we don't have the budget, it is not a priority, it is unnecessary use of funds. So we changed tack. We started talking to the agencies about the business benefits, and we found 3 core business benefits to agencies. The first one was efficiency. If you publish data that you are already asked for and it creates efficiencies, now you can take some of that time you saved and reinvest in more efficiencies, and government agencies loved that. I had one agency, by proactively sharing one data set every 3 months, saved themselves 1,000 questions on notice in the very first Senate estimates. And you know how much time it takes to respond to parliamentary questions. I had another agency want to build an app. So the second opportunity from a business benefit was in service delivery. Agencies need to deliver services all the time. And quite often the data that sits under the services gets built into the application and it costs money. So one agency said, we need to build this app. We've been quoted $30,000 to build the API. And we said, that's okay, we've got free publishing for you in all of government open data. I'll send you a technologist to set it up. And they got free data sharing. So in the first case, they saved some money for their service delivery. I have other agencies that needed service information. Okay, let's have a publicly facing services register of the services of government, because then we can build our services around it, but so can other people, non-government people. But the benefit there comes to the third benefit, which is innovation. So by having the public data public, of course, they started to see benefits, not just in terms of businesses building on the data, but also in terms of them using the data in ways government hadn't imagined that could create benefit back to government. In the case of the API that we built, it was for data that needed to be used by the regulators to advertise the energy rating of every electrical device sold in Australia. Suddenly the regulators could actually have accurate information informing their advertising campaigns. What was interesting about that, as we discovered, was that prior to having that data available, they were all using Google to try to determine the accurate energy rating of the devices they were selling. So we immediately got an efficiency. I guess the lesson learned was agencies will come for the business benefits, but they will stay for the innovation. They very rarely come for the innovation in a sustainable way. And whenever we were investing in startups to build on the back of government without investing in the actual supply chain of data, then we were building castles on sand that were not sustainable. Government is the number one procurer and spender of technology in any economy, generally speaking. So why do we take a small amount of our budget and invest it in startups, in investment outside of government, when we could invest in the transformation of government, which would itself drive an economy and drive a capability and drive exports and drive opportunities? If we continue to spend in government the way that we do, then we're going to miss the greatest opportunity for economic transformation into the digital economy. Okay, so the final thing I'll say with regards to data was that, of course, there were also opportunities specific more to cities and states. The first one is around emergency response. In Wellington the other day, they had an earthquake. Now, we had a visitor from Wellington in Sydney. And in Sydney, he got a notification on his phone. He said, we're getting an earthquake in an hour. I said, okay, you cool? And he said, no, it's okay, I'll keep watching. And then when the earthquake hit, he got a notification within 5 minutes. All of the sensor devices, all of the IoT sensors in all of the infrastructure around Wellington reported back within 5 minutes as to the structural integrity of the buildings and whether any people need to be removed, whether any buildings were going to be a risk, whether there was any public risk. 10 minutes. This is extraordinary. So this ability to use IoT is important. So in New South Wales government, which is the largest state in Australia, we are building an all-of-government state infrastructure IoT strategy, which I'm sure will be of interest. Everything we do, we publish publicly, and I'm sure that will be helpful to you. And a lot of the cities around Australia have started getting a standardization on how they publish their garbage data, their tree data, their services data, again, so it can be integrated by others for service delivery. So it's this looking at investment in digital public infrastructure, which is critical. We keep investing in projects and machines or software, but starting to recognize the things that government is uniquely placed to do, and to do it as digital public infrastructure that the economy can build upon, is critical. So what I'm actually here to talk about, which actually goes beyond open data and data generally and public data, is digital government, which is really just taking it a little bit further. So the first thing I like to remind people is we built all of this. We invented all of our systems, our governments, our programs, this building. We actually invented everything, and yet we keep finding ourselves constrained to how it is today. We're not going to get a better future by just building on the past. We need to invent the future that we want and then start walking towards it. It's very critical that we start to realize that it's actually in our hands to design better futures. 5 and 3 and 10-year strategies are usually just the status quo sped up. What does a better future look like? So we started when I was in New Zealand, and we're continuing this now in New South Wales, looking at 50 years. What does 50 years good look like? And if you can plan a 50-year good collaboratively with your communities that reflect the public values of your communities, then you can start to reverse engineer the digital public infrastructure that you need to take you into the future. What do we want to keep? What do we want to discard? This, of course, is the original map of the flat Earth as it was known. It was known that we had a flat Earth, and then one day we didn't. What do we want to leave behind? There are remnants of the past that anchor us to a reef as the tide starts to rise, and we need to figure out what is an anchor and what is an opportunity. Distributed power, some of the previous panels spoke about this a little bit, but governments today and public services are facing a huge challenge in that the individuals, the citizens, are more empowered than ever before. So how do we respond to that? Well, part of it is about starting to act like a node in a network where we build on the value of others, but we also contribute value to others, rather than a king in a castle and constantly trying to control from the top, because it doesn't work anymore. And people will just move to other countries. So the best way to predict the future is to invent it. It's a lovely quote by Alan Kay, and I think that it's a critical part of this. These slides, there's a lot in here, and I don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to actually go fairly quickly through, but they're all publicly available, and so I urge you to see them. I want to go through, this is probably the most effective and very expertly, as you can see, drawn graph that actually really has drawn a different conversation with public servants across Australia and New Zealand and other places that I work. The fact is that the speed of change, the speed of complexity is only getting faster and faster. So we're seeing this exponential curve of complexity. The ability for the public sector to respond largely is linear. So what we're seeing is an exponential needs gap emerging. So we actually need to transform how we think about government, because if we aren't being an enabler for other actors in the economy and in the society to be part of the solution, then we will actually only perpetuate the inequities that are currently created and sped up by technology. So I want to quickly talk about paradigm shifts. We've moved from a central to distributed paradigm. We've moved from an analog to digital paradigm, and that's not just about digitizing analog processes. If you have 20 steps and you digitize each 20 step, you just get a faster 20 steps. Actually going back to what was the point and starting to design from scratch is where you get true innovation and true transformation. Moving from scarcity to surplus. How many of you have seen a 3D printer? Not really. How interesting. So a lot of people, even if they have seen it, think it's a kitschy, fun thing and maybe you can print out some chocolate or whatever. Did you know that there has actually been the first successfully transplanted kidney? Successfully transplanted 3D printed kidney. This is transformational for health. The Ministry of Health in New Zealand was looking at the notion of having large-scale 3D printers in libraries so that you could 3D print your medication, 3D print your prosthetics, 3D print the chair that you need. We are entering into an era of surplus, and it's quite exciting. And of course, moving from normative to formative. The notion of moving from a compliance mentality, and this is particularly important for our public sectors, into a forming the future mentality. So there's a lot of opportunities facing us. We know about 3D printing. Rocket travel will be normalized, they reckon, in the next 10 years. And what that means is I can live in Australia, so I'm close to my family, but I could drop over in an hour, work for the day here, and then head back and be home in time for tea. What will that do to the world, apart from dramatic? We already have something like 20 million humans in the air at any point in time traveling in planes. I think it will only get more. But it will also drive more competitive citizenships. Citizens will increasingly choose to live in the country that gives them the best values and the best quality of life. So governments, it's really important that we start competing on creating not just good economic environment, but good quality of life environment. New Zealand is, I think, leading the way in this, but also Nepal's been doing this for a long time. But New Zealand introduced a wellness framework specifically to start changing the incentive systems around quality of life metrics. But then, of course, there's automation, and then there's human augmentation. There's many things coming down the chain, and the key here is how we start to embrace and extend rather than just react as they happen. I was going to play this. Unfortunately, apparently this computer's not on the internet, so I can't, but this is the 50-year future, so you'll get the slides. But I encourage you to go and have a look. It's a virtual reality experience from the perspective of you have a personal AI, a personal helper, that interfaces with government and business and helps you sort of, the government has announced their new grants data model, and your AI has run it over your business. You've automatically got a grant, and now how would you like to spend it with all the modeling tools to help you do so? So there's a lot in there. It's got a lot of opportunities to look at what good could look like. And it changed the whole conversation in New Zealand, because a lot of agencies talk innovation, but when it comes down to it, they just plan new websites and apps. And the future is not in websites and apps. So we need to start building services that take that into account. So how do we start freeing up? Probably the biggest challenge facing us at the moment is capacity. Everyone's full-time at work and full-time at home. And while ever that's the case, we're not going to dramatically unleash the ingenuity and creativity of humans, and we're not going to shift from an industrial age work week. So there's a lot of opportunities to create that capacity. People talk about AI, getting rid of lots of jobs. Why wouldn't we be explicitly using this opportunity of automation and AI to say, let's explicitly choose to move towards a 20-hour work week or a 10-hour work week, and actually start creating the capacity that we need to actually live better quality lives? It's just a thought. I want to talk briefly about transformation versus iteration. I think a lot of innovation accidentally a lot of things accidentally get called innovation that are just shiny new things. And the problem is, if you take an old problem or an old paradigm and implement it the same, but just with shiny new tools, you don't get a different outcome. And it's very dangerous to assume so. So what I would like to do is, the Michelin man here is the notion that every time we add a Band-Aid, every time we just respond to a particular pain point and just cover something or just fix a particular thing, we're covering ourselves with so many bandages that we can't move. We lose our agility, as it were. We need to be able to actually rip the Band-Aid off every so often and actually get back to what we're trying to achieve. So iteration is generally an improvement. Innovation is changing how you do things. Transformation has to be systemic and normalized. So iteration might be a faster horse versus a car, faster car versus a portal. PDFs online are not innovation, but actually building a user-centered application that isn't just speeding it up or making a digitized process, but starts to say, why do I ask you to give me your pay invoice, your salary proof, in order for me to determine whether you can get this benefit or this tax credit? Why wouldn't I say, hey, do you mind if I ask the tax department if you meet the means test 27? I don't need to know how much you earn. I shouldn't even have to ask. That's a dignity issue for a lot of very vulnerable people. And rather than me getting that and processing it and then having to store it securely, I don't need any of that personal information. Do you meet means test 27? Yes, no. Now you're eligible. Here's your thing. And you don't have to go through the indignity of saying, please, sir, can I have some more? Sharing data, verifiable claims. Better website, maybe personal AI-driven services, better silos. One of the key strategies that we've deployed in Australia, that we've deployed at the federal and state levels and deployed in New Zealand, is the notion of shifting government to gov as a platform. If you take a service, make it beautiful and user-centric and service designed and all that stuff, but not modular architecture, not built in a way that gives you flexibility to shift channels or shift user interfaces or improve the updates, or make that data, content, transactional services or business rules available outside of the context of that one use case, then you've missed an opportunity. So it's in building modular architecture, it's in building those modules in a way that can be reused outside of that single use case that we start to get real opportunity to get that exponential response. And a good example of that was we took all of the business rules around the eligibility criteria and calculations for benefits relating to having a child. We made them available as a rules engine that was basically the legislation as code that then served one service, then another service, then another service, all based on the same rules code without having to continually reinterpret that and get it wrong. So Gov as a platform is one of those ways that we don't just dramatically improve the service delivery and responsiveness and resilience of government services. It also creates an opportunity for us to be an enabler for third parties to build on the back of government, and not just private sector, but non-profits as well. In a lot of cases, the non-profit organisation is the one that the vulnerable person first goes to. They go to their GP, they go to the Smith family, or I'm not sure what the equivalents are here in France, I'm afraid, but they generally don't go to government first because we are the cops as well as the social workers, and recognising that is very important for us to provide effective services to vulnerable people. Legislation as code I mentioned, and it's worth mentioning that not all transformation is necessary. I will probably never give up my coffee for space food. So this is where we have to have strong, competent, capable and experts in government, in public sectors, so that we can make that critical assessment of where we need to do transformation, where we need to do iteration, where we can do simple efficiencies, or where we can do the different sorts of work. This isn't a matter of just outsourcing or insourcing. It's a matter of a confident, capable public sector that can do its work. Generally speaking, if you're talking better, faster, cheaper, you're talking about iteration. Generally speaking, if you're talking about how to solve the problem, how to drive a systemic outcome, how to drive an outcomes-based service, how to drive multilateral value, that's where you're starting to talk about transformation. And the change gets measured linearly or in factors. So one of the key things when you start to try to build a digital strategy, and a high-impact digital strategy, is you start to look at what's the role of government in the 21st century. I think this is critical because there's been too much conversation, certainly in the countries that I've worked, around, oh, we don't need government, it can just get out of the way. Like, how about we just let the private sector do it all? Well, I think that the public don't expect the private sector to do it all. I think the public expect, I think the communities that we serve and the democracies that we serve expect that government has a role. Now, could the role be bigger or smaller than what it is? You know, that's up to debate and that's up to politics. But the notion that the entire of the public sector is fully contestable and that we're all just poor cousins to private sector is demonstrably untrue and has created an existential crisis in our public services where people feel disempowered to engage expertly and with expert decision making. So let's have a quick look at what I think the roles of the government in the 21st century are. Ensuring all individuals have the ability to thrive. Leadership is critical and to actually represent the best interests and the values of the communities that we serve because we are systemically motivated to do that. To create as much as is possible in this rapidly changing environment, stability, balance and predictability. Participatory democracy was spoken about a little bit in the last panel, and it's critical. We need to figure out better ways to engage and empower people to make decisions and have agency in the policies, regulation, legislation and services that affects them. That means going beyond just user research. That means actually engaging people in the process. Government as a platform, I've spoken about a little bit, but really seeing ourselves as an enabler rather than just a doer to people. And of course the skills, and the skills aren't just coding or tech. The skills are also about self-awareness and about critical thinking and about empathy and science. All the things that actually create a holistic human is what's going to create a holistic human service, because public services are actually, human services as well. So my hypothesis is the best way we're going to create an effective, responsive and resilient public sector in the 21st century is to start to shift a little bit away, because there's lessons learned and there's some good things that came from it, but moving from the new public management methodology into a public values management approach. On that topic, it's probably worth quickly mentioning that in New South Wales, we created a measurement framework called the Human Services Outcomes Framework. And it looked at these 7 human service metrics. So it looked at social community, empowerment, safety, home, health, economic, and education and skills as themes of metrics. Now, this wasn't built for government. This was built to actually monitor and get a return on investment analysis and a prioritization investment approach to how we fund non-profit services. And it's a brilliant little methodology. It works really well. So then we found it and said, well, why aren't we applying this to all government services? And it was very fascinating to see people say, well, that's a very interesting idea. Maybe we should measure the human impact of human services. What a fabulous idea. In New Zealand, they went a whole step further. They introduced what they call the intergenerational wellness framework. This explicitly says that it's not just about the economic capital. Economic capital, human capital, social capital, and natural capital. And if you have to build, and they introduced their wellness budget in their very first term, if you have to build a business case that talks to all 4 of those capitals, you start to change the incentive system. When your incentive system only values money, it inevitably puts people second to money. I like to tell people, I can be 100% efficient. Give me nothing, I'll do nothing. It's very simple. We see efficiency as an ends, not a means, but a means to what? It's true, yeah? I have to remember that the translation will take a few. Digital public infrastructure, it's critical we move away from just funding projects and just funding launches of things and not funding the continuous improvement. So taking, again, a critical analysis to what should digital public infrastructure look like. And certainly for the work that we're doing, it's more than just broadband and communications and connectivity. It's around data infrastructure. It's around not just building an IoT project, but building a sensor backbone. It's around digital legislation and regulation, possibly blockchain-based compliance is some of the things we've started exploring. As we moved into augmented reality and virtual reality, where's the platform play so we don't accidentally repeat the apps wars that we've all just come through, heavily scarred in some cases. And of course identity. But there are opportunities there, but usually, again, we build these things specific to a particular use case, and then it's not applicable anywhere else. So starting to think about what digital public infrastructure we need for the future moving forward. Another terrible diagram, but again, shifting from siloed mentality into integrated services. And the thing is that the more you look at that model of modular architecture, the more you realize it goes all the way down. It's worth pointing out the Digital 9 Charter. So the Digital 5, it started, are 5 nations that self-identified as being digital leaders in the world, and it's now grown to 9. Unfortunately, France isn't on the list, but don't worry, neither is Australia, so we'll just hang out in the wings and tell them that we need to join. But it's worth pointing out because their charter is explicit about user needs, open source, open standards, open market, and open government being critical aspects to a digital government strategy. And you see the word open there a lot. I truly believe that open that's not digital doesn't scale, and digital that's not open doesn't last. It's really about bringing together the open government and digital government agendas that we will start to see true transformation, as was talked about in the previous panel. So a big congratulations to Never. I noted that you actually won the open source trophy recently, so well done. On that note, I guess that there's opportunities here around open source software and open data, open development. But it's not just doing stuff openly, it's also being open to new ideas. It's also being open to other people giving feedback. It's about working together. We do collaborations with other governments around the world. Because we work in the Office of the Government Chief Information and Digital Officer, our peers are usually in other jurisdictions because all the agencies we deal with are dealing with their vertical accountabilities. Whereas working with all of government and all of system collaborators means that we can co-develop policy, practice, platforms, software that is helpful to the jurisdictions that we serve. Multidisciplinary teams is critical to this. Technologists can't do it alone, service designers can't do it alone, data people can't do it alone, policy people certainly can't do it alone. And yet we've functionally segmented all of those disciplines in government to the point where they don't know how to work together and they are uncomfortable to work together. We need to embrace that discomfort as part of the opportunity to find the true innovation where those disciplines start to bump up against each other. Here is a lovely little success story for you. When we started exploring legislation as code and we looked at what was happening around the world, we found a fabulous tool called OpenFisca. OpenFisca was developed by the French state incubator, and it's extraordinary. So we picked it up and started using it. The top one there says OpenFisca Aotearoa, which is the name for New Zealand. And then suddenly Israel said we wanted to play. So they picked it up and started using it. Uruguay picked it up and started using it. It's being used in about a dozen governments around the world. Amazing software, amazing development, amazing technical work. And there's collaboration happening because it's open source. So we could actually collaborate it because the standard was already somewhat developed, and then we could start co-developing that standard moving forward. The open source just gives us the ability to do things in that kind of way. It's not to say everything should be open source, but when it comes to some of these key digital public infrastructure, when it comes to these not well-defined areas, it's critical that we can actually have the ability to extend and modify and change moving forward. So machine consumable legislation, I won't talk about too long because I'm rapidly running out of time, but it's worth noting that as we all start considering how we can best use automation and artificial intelligence and more machine learning, the rules of government, the baseline building blocks of government, which are effectively in our legislation and regulation, but also in our operating policy, if we don't make those things available transparently, publicly, in a machine-readable format as well as a human-readable format, then we will miss the opportunity to have traceable transparency and traceability to decision-making. If you can't say the machine made the decision based on these rules and this data at this point in time, then when someone questions it, not just the next day, but 10 years from now, you're in a lot of trouble. So the opportunity here is AI and machine learning and automation gives us a lot of opportunities, but legislation as code is critical. And that's not just translating the legislation that already exists, that's drafting it as code in the first place. So we actually had policy people, legislative drafters, and developers, as well as service designers in the same room at the same time, co-developing isomorphic legislation, policy, and code. And then we could test it, and then we could do regression testing, and we could actually do the modeling to make sure that the implementation of the legislation met the original policy intent. The legislative drafters said they would never draft policy the same way again. They were absolutely blown away. The policy people, blown away. So in New South Wales, we're actually changing our entire, all of government, digital government policy team into a policy lab and bringing all of those methodologies together so we can start to transform how policy happens. Because otherwise, if we improve our services, we're just the tail wagging the dog. We need to get back to what was the point of the service in the first place. So just a couple more things. So what that actually meant in practice, the legislation as code, well, it meant that one of our services, people having a child come into their family, could actually answer a few questions anonymously, because most people don't want to log in to find what they're eligible for because people like their privacy, weirdly enough. And it's a bit creepy when government just says, here's what you should get. But it meant that people could answer some rough questions and then find out all of the benefits and tax credits that were relevant to them across about 6 different departments. It was just all of the departments started with, but they could just come to my website. Oh yeah, but I'm not going to have the rules for the other department. So that ability to integrate the business rules, let alone the data and content, became critical. I won't talk about this too much, but basically traditional policy throws stuff over the fence at every step. The modern approach to policy and legislative drafting is that we do the whole thing in a multidisciplinary way and test with people as we go. So all of that research is publicly available. I will quickly finish with some of the work that we're doing in New South Wales. So open government is a big part of what we do, huge part of what we do. Open government and digital government is the same program for us. So Policy Lab, I just mentioned. Life journey mapping has become a really fabulous mechanism to get horizontal collaboration across agencies. Because usually it's impossible to work across agencies. There's no reason, because everyone needs to just report to their boss, their minister, their head of department, and their mandate. When you map the entire journey of a person through an experience, having a child, moving, dying, you start to say, here are all the service providers in government, across jurisdictions, across sectors, family and friends, non-profits. You can then find the natural partners to collaborate with. Too often we use the word partnership to mean having a good relationship with a vendor. And it's lovely to have a good relationship with a vendor, but it's not true partnership, because true partnership means having the shared goal, mutually investing, mutually designing, and mutually implementing. So this creates an opportunity to actually mutually invest and engage in horizontal capabilities. CX pipeline, too often people come up with true opportunities to dramatically improve the citizen experience with government, but it gets dropped on the floor because it's outside of my mandate. Well, we're just setting up a way to capture all of those things publicly so that agencies can then prioritize, all of government can prioritize and invest in dramatic change and opportunities and reusable components, but also the private sector, universities and non-profits can say, I can see an opportunity that I can go and improve things. So that will be very good. The digital design system, a lot of people have standards and such. We're trying to just build that out, data marketplace. But we're also trying to build, and this is a big deal for Australia, not so much for a lot of other countries, but trying to build a better roadmap for how government can engage with our Indigenous communities. So that's going to be a big one. Okay, I won't go into that too much. That's the diagrammatic version of what I just said. I want to quickly, as my last thing, because I know I'm quite out of time now, I think, is just reflect on digital government as a concept. Digital government traditionally has meant a little bit of automation, a little, maybe a digital service channel. It might mean, applying a bit of service design or a bit of technology or a bit of agile. It tends to be measuring the success in financial terms, and it tends to be reacting to new trends. Oh, there's an emerging trend, let's go write a paper. It does also still maintain that centralised power and centralised approach. I would suggest that an evolved approach to digital government, where it's trying to evolve to, and I'm really pleased to say that New South Wales, right to the top of the government, is right on board with this, trying to move into the more mature digital government approach, is about embracing social and technical changes and trends, distributing capability across government, not just centralising. Gov as a platform, as I've mentioned, not just design-led services, but design-led systems. So applying design thinking and system thinking to the regulatory system and saying, well, actually, what's the point? And how do we actually do regulation in a completely different way that is goes to the original intent, starts to get quite profound. Co-design with communities, not just consult with communities, co-design with communities the solutions that they need. Distributed and open delivery. Measuring outcomes holistically, not just economically, and actually starting to empower staff to be agents in that transformation. And I guess the final thing is that it's not just about something better. It's not just about better public services. It's about developing that ambitious, optimistic, and inclusive, better future that we develop with the communities that we serve. So I'll finish there. I did want to take some questions, but I hope that's been useful. There's a lot of stuff that we're doing publicly. All of our blogs and code and websites share everything that we do, and it would be absolutely fantastic to collaborate with Never and with your 5 levels of government. We have 3. We have felt a little bit bad about having 3 levels. I can't even believe how many levels of government you have. How do you do it? I guess you're the home of bureaucracy. It's amazing. So thank you.
Un, deux. Oui, merci Pia pour cette explication. Alors, j'ai deux questions avant de donner la parole à la salle. La première question, ça fait des années qu'on entend tout ce qui est numérique, tout ce qui est transformation numérique. Il faut redonner la parole à l'individu, il faut redonner la parole à la personne, il faut remettre l'individu, l'être humain au milieu de toute cette problématique. Je n'ai jamais entendu une conférence aussi claire et qui justifiait, qui expliquait ça aussi bien que celle qu'on vient d'entendre. Bravo et merci Pia de nous l'avoir expliqué aussi clairement. Et en même temps, si je peux me permettre une analogie avec notre président actuel, et en même temps, tu as commencé ton discours en parlant de l'open data, et j'ai trouvé là, à l'opposé, il faut faire de l'open data, et toutes les explications que tu donnais étaient très orientées business. Il fallait que ça intéresse, il fallait de l'argent, alors que nous, en France, si on fait de l'open data, c'est une question d'éthique. C'est une question de justice sociale, c'est une question de normalité, de plus juridique que économique. Et ça m'intéresse parce que je suis du coup doublement impressionné d'avoir à la fois un discours très orienté humain et à la fois très orienté business. Explique-nous ça.
I guess the answer is that it is imperative that we shift to a human-centered approach that builds on the quality of life for people. I totally agree with the importance of the ethical frameworks and the ethical approach. In fact, the work that's happening in Canada around ethical service delivery and algorithmic transparency is amazing. At the same time, the incentive systems of our public services, since New Public Management, has actually put in place business incentives. Now, if we change the incentive systems of our public sectors so that they also value from how you ask for money. When you put a business case together, if you say this is going to be great for people, but it's going to cost a lot of money, this won't be as good for people, but it'll cost a lot less, we know which way that usually goes, at least in Australia. So in Australia, it's certainly been about business. So that notion of understanding that the incentive system drives a business imperative, and therefore giving the business imperative as well as the human imperative gives a sustainable way of driving both. That's why the New Zealand shift to the wellness framework is, I think, probably the most transformative thing I've ever seen for governments, because it won't happen immediately, but it will completely change the behaviour of agencies back towards being more human-centred, more empathetic, and more focused on the quality of life and the quality of their natural capitals as well than the truly simply business-oriented approach. So I guess it's about understanding all the incentive systems, but also the purpose of government, and understanding that at the end of the day, if humans aren't thriving in the systems that we create, then what's the point?
Alors j'avais une deuxième question. Enfin, merci pour cette explication, et ça prouve bien qu'il y a sans doute des paradigmes différents dans nos sociétés. J'en arrête là avec ce sujet. Il y avait une deuxième question, donc je le disais en introduction, tu es une championne du monde de l'open government. Pourtant, en 2016, ici, la France accueillait l'Open Government Partnership en fin 2016. Et bien sûr, il y a un certain nombre de projets qui ont démarré. D'ailleurs, peut-être connais-tu le projet France Connect, qui permet justement d'éviter de donner sa feuille d'impôt ou sa feuille de salaire pour avoir une allocation. On peut faire ce genre de choses, donc c'est encore balbutiant, mais ça démarre. Et justement, là encore, je trouve qu'il y a une différence d'avancée. J'ai l'impression que les pays comme partout où tu es passé finalement, la Nouvelle-Zélande, l'Australie sont encore bien plus avancés que nous sur ce sujet-là. Je ne l'ai peut-être pas dit, mais tu es finalement pour nous en France l'équivalent de Monsieur Nadi Bouana, qui est le remplaçant de Monsieur Henri Verdier, directeur de la DINSIC en France, donc la DSI du gouvernement, et tu as à peu près ce poste-là en Australie, dans la province de Sydney. Donc, comme tu es exactement sur le même sujet, sais-tu te comparer avec la France pour nous dire où on en est, nous, dans combien d'années est-ce qu'on aura rattrapé l'Australie?
I think it's firstly worth saying that I don't think any jurisdiction is ahead of any other one entirely. I think that everyone's got things that they've done better and everyone has things that they can catch up. So the trick isn't to say which one is ahead. The trick is to say, oh, that's a really great thing that I want to do as well. And to then say to your own jurisdiction, oh, if the Harry met Sally methodology, I call this, I want what she's having. So the notion that once another jurisdiction does something that you want to do, this is why we need to collaborate and work more together so that we can build on the shoulders of each other. Australia only joined the OGP quite late, actually. And a lot of the OGP commitments in Australia have been around open data and have been around freedom of information access. So I actually think we can go a lot further. I think that actually starting to to shift from the iterative approach to government consultation, where we, instead of doing town hall consultation, we start to do online consultation. It's still an iteration. We should start looking at, well, how do we put more decisions into the hands of people, actually? Imagine if you could actually say, how do you want to spend the 5% of your tax directly? Not on a particular school, but maybe on a work program. To be able to say, I want to spend it on the air quality of my mountain if I'm in New Zealand, or I want to spend it on homelessness because I've got back to Sydney after 10 years. And when I lived there 10 years ago, and I lived there for 10 years, when I lived in Sydney, I would maybe go past a couple of homeless people, and that would be it. I've gone past maybe 70 in the first few weeks of working back in Sydney. So there's a problem. There's a big problem. And so I guess the reason I say this is because identifying the transformational opportunities for open government and what that means and how government can be open is critical. There's a beautiful methodology developed in Australia and also applied in New Zealand called shared design, shared ways. When government comes to a community and says, well, I just want to consult with you, it's still putting on to community or just doing what community wants. If you come to a community and say, well, here are my values and ideas of good, here are your values and here's what's good, let's come to a shared agreement on what we will do together and walk together. Let's take an equitable co-design approach, because just because I consult with you, I'm paid to be in the room and you're not. So it's not necessary. It's not equitable financially, morally, economically, socially, culturally. So learning ways to actually walk with people and actually equitably co-develop not just their services, but the future and the policies with them, that's where we need to get to, and we're not there yet. So the steps we're taking now around the policy lab, around publicly doing policy development, around publicly exposing more of our work program and how we work and being open, I think is a good next step. And I know that you've done a lot of that as well. So what I would suggest is, rather than the competition, that we just hold hands and run faster.
Merci. Y a-t-il des questions dans la salle? Il nous reste quelques minutes.
Bonjour. Imaginons que je suis un élu ou un agent d'une collectivité territoriale et j'ai une spécialité, par exemple l'eau. Et je suis assez bon dans ce domaine. Mais par contre, j'y connais rien dans l'informatique, le digital. Quel est le chemin qui me permettrait de contribuer? Comment je devrais me former, ou comment est-ce que la collectivité devrait me former pour que je puisse jouer et participer à la création d'une transformation digitale de l'infrastructure de la collectivité?
First of all, I think that anyone with no training should be able to participate in their democracy. So it's actually our job to do the hard work to make it easy for people, regardless of their level of training, to participate. That's the first thing. And I say that just because I think people get stuck on, well, once we train people, then they can come and play in our systems, but it misses the point that people should just be able to participate in their democracy without any training. Now, when it comes to digital transformation, the skills of digital transformation fall into a few categories, and I can be quite clear on this because we've just advertised a digital talent pool. I'm about to hire another 30 people, and so we thought quite deeply about what the skills of digital transformation are, and digital government and open government. So for us, it came down to policy, but not necessarily traditional policy, starting to look at people who have training in lots of different areas, particularly science, and bringing them into the policy discipline so we get diversity of perspective and approaches. Because when you hire the same old politics or policy specialists and degrees, you're going to continue to get the same old approach. But so policy, research and design, of course, not just service designers, but speculative design, games design. Games design is one of the most powerful weapons that we have because it gives you very rapid development to test. And games are user-centered by default. If a game is not user-centered, then you don't want to play. So it's a very competitive and user-centered design kind of thing. But also systems design. I have a diagram that I give all my staff, and they think it's hilarious. I call it my Eye of Sauron diagram, because your Eye of Sauron is your management or the minister, but it's also the public. You always have to have your fast value. People talk about quick wins, always wanting quick wins, but quick wins often lead to long losses. So if you keep part of your work agenda on the quick wins, but you have another chunk of your work agenda in the long, high value, then that gives you a chance to research whether that particular service or benefit or whatever is actually meeting the original policy intent at all. At the same time, people that are eligible should be able to get access to it now. So you need to help people in different forms of design. We need technologists, absolutely. The notion that you do the design then hand it over to a technologist misses the point. The technologist can bring a different form of creativity into the design process. And if you don't have technology-informed design, then you don't necessarily get the best outcomes. You often get normative outcomes even from a design approach. Data, not just data analysts and data scientists, because they're the sexy ones. We need plumbers. We need people that know how to deal with APIs and databases and systems and how to actually get data into a state that you can use it. And the final one that we had was looking at cultural experts, actually, people that know how to do engagement, how to work with people, how to translate, how to document, how to engage and how to do change management. So they're a big part of this kind of agenda. And because we are, as an all-of-government capability, work publicly, that also helps us hold ourselves accountable and get that peer feedback. So I guess the final skills I spoke about before in terms of critical thinking, in terms of self-awareness, but in terms of developing a form of professionalism in the public service that welcomes and encourages peer review. That would also be a really good one as well, because then you're not limited by your expertise, you can draw on all the expertise.
Eh bien, le temps qui nous était imparti est terminé. Merci Pia pour cette intervention et encore une fois, merci d'être venu et d'avoir fait tant de kilomètres pour nous rejoindre. Bon séjour en France, bon séjour à Nevers, bon retour et merci à tous. Un petit applaudissement s'il vous plaît pour remercier Pia.